Hey, it's Marella Manelli, and today I'm going to show you a black cherry box dye hair color correction, and we're going to transform this hair into some gorgeous caramel highlights using all Kenra color. Now let's go ahead and get started. So my model today has black cherry hair dye. She did it about 6 months ago, and you can really see some old highlights underneath there that are trying to show through. But overall, she's got lots of pigment going on, and she didn't just color it once, she colored it about 2 or 3 times. So I need to go in with a color corrector. So first I decided to use Malibu CPR. So the way you mix this up is about 2 ounces of warm or room temperature water and just mix the contents of the package. Now, what this is going to do for me is create an even canvas before I go in and do my color correction and remove a lot of those unwanted indirect dyes. So I'm going to clarify her hair first with Kenra Professional clarifying shampoo. And since it's been about 6 months since she did her last color, I'm really focused on those ends. So I want to make sure that I take my shampoo and really scrub that in there as much as possible. The clarifying shampoo overall is going to remove any surface buildup, but it's a great prepping tool before going in with Malibu CPR. So they really kind of work in tandem together for this particular color service. I did a total of 2 clarifying shampoos on my model and then towel dried her really well at the bowl and then applied the Malibu CPR mainly on those mids and ends, and we took the rest of the product and moved it a little bit up, and then I'm processing her under the dryer for a full 45 minutes. So again, this is going to help remove a lot of those indirect dyes that we need to remove before we go in with any lightener or color service. Once she was done processing, I did another clarifying shampoo as well as a light conditioner on the mids and ends, and you can already see how much color we lifted out of her hair that was from that black cherry box dye. Now, what's cool about Malibu CPR is you can do it a few times depending on the amount of dye that you're working with, but I felt like this was a nice canvas to work with for what we were trying to achieve. So I'm going to be pulling out my level finder. Now, I can tell she is definitely a level 3 according to the Kenra level finder, which is in the back of your Kenra color book. And I know that we have a little bit of lighter pieces towards the ends with lots of those undertones poking through, which is why you see a lot of those red pigments. For her sectioning, I'm keeping it really simple with a parting right down the middle, which is where she normally parts it, and then right on top of the ear. And for this project, I'm going to be using my all-time favorite power lifter, which is Blue Powder Lightener in Simply Blonde. And then I'm going to be mixing that up 1:2 mixing ratio with 30 volume developer. For my secondary color, I'm going to be using 4B at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer. Now, this particular color is going to live in between the foils, which you'll see in just a second. To get started, I'm going to take a deep V section right in the back and then taking a chunky weave and teasing it. So what I'm doing here is using my coup board because it has a little teeth on the end of the board, which help kind of push up those teasy lights so I have a nice clean working space. And then after I get my lightener on those mids, I stroke the lightener up with my power painter and then saturate the mids and ends further and then flat wrap it with another foil right on top. I personally like working this way because it just makes it a little bit faster for me instead of going through and folding each of the foils. So I'm going to repeat the same technique on the other side, making sure to tease, and then just a little added trick if you want to help the hair stick to your foil, just paint on your lightener onto the foil before applying your lightener with your board. So some people like using a board and some people don't. It's totally a personal preference. I love using a board when I'm trying to create a teasy light and a foliage all at the same time. Now, as I start to work throughout this hair, I do need to correct what's laying in between. So I decided that I'm going to be applying the Demi permanent hair color in between each of the foils as I work throughout the hair. So whatever's left on that underside, I'm going to go ahead and paint that on from those mids to ends. Because I'm using 4B, it's not going to be any darker than her natural hair color because we know it's a level 3. So I'm not too concerned about making a line of demarcation because that's not what I'm going to be doing with this. What I'm trying to do is blend in her natural into a slightly lighter shade that has a little bit of light reflection and some control with that 4B. So once I get that Demi permanent on, now I'm going to continue on with my next section, which you can see I'm doing some horizontals as well as some diagonals throughout her entire hair. So I'm going to take a horizontal section, and this is where I'm going to take a slice. So the difference between the slice and the heavy weave that I did a little earlier is that the slice is going to have a lot more coverage and a lot more impact for what I'm trying to achieve with her highlights. Plus the teasy light is going to give me that rooted effect that I'm looking for. So that way her highlights aren't going all the way to her root, but we're still going to get the amount of brightness that we're desiring because we're putting it into a foil. I'm going to continue on with the same sectioning, taking diagonals as well as horizontal slices throughout the entire back section. Again, this is going to give me more coverage and brightness in the back for what we're trying to create, especially since our target is a caramel highlight. So after I'm done with each of the foils in that section, I always apply that Demi permanent to go in and correct. So something to keep in mind when doing that blend is you do want to use your hands to really saturate as well as diffuse the line of that demarcation. So even though we're not really creating a line of demarcation with Demi permanent, which is why I really love it, you still want to keep that in mind that you have a nice blend. So using your hands to kind of continue to paint on and diffuse the line between her natural into her old color, which overall we're going to darken and correct. Now, when you get to the part of the head where it becomes a little too wide because of your sectioning, I typically just make a stopping point. So kind of creating another front section, if you will, towards the front. Now I want to create a lot of depth, so this is why I went with a diagonal back section. And now I'm going to be taking weaves along the sides because I want that dimension, but still doing that rooted teasy light. So all of the hair that's sitting right behind this particular section is key because this is what's going to provide me that background for the highlights that we're putting in. This background is really key, especially when we talk about the money piece that we're going to create for the front. So just kind of keep that in mind as you start to see this application come to life. You can almost visually see exactly where those highlights are going to live. Now, as I start to work my way up, this is where I'm going to continue to create corners, or triangular sections. And this is why right here on this top section, I'm doing a diagonal section. So just keep that in mind. If you want the ultimate coverage as well as diffusion, bricklayering your sections with triangles makes a really beautiful result that you can't really tell where those highlights are coming from, as well as the background looks really seamless and diffused as well because you're creating those points inside of the hair. Once I get to a place where I'm comfortable with the width of the section that I'm working with, that's where I'm going to finish off with horizontal sections, or what you would call a mohawk section. I'm taking an 1/8 inch section or slice and then just using this weaving comb from Mar, and it automatically takes a pretty chunky weave for me. But you can see when I'm applying my lightener, I'm still keeping it slightly rooted. I'm not taking it all the way to the root, but I am feathering it up, and I'm okay with that jagged line of demarcation that I'm creating right at the top. And then I finish off until I get to the front part of my money piece section that I separated out, and the money piece is the last thing that I am applying. The reason why the front pieces are the last is because typically they're the most fragile, and I do like to take my time right here because this is the part where your client sees first, and I want to make sure it's perfect and flawless. So one of my little tips that I like to personally do along the hairline, regardless if I'm doing a money piece or not, is I always comb the hair up and away from the face and then weave back down. And this is going to create a really clean space for you to paint, and you're not going to have to worry so much about bleeding a foil, especially right there on that hairline. Now, if your client wants something a little on the subtle bright side, I usually go in with 2 back-to-back highlights with no hair in between these foils. So for that first foil, I take it all the way to the root, and for my second foil, I basically still take it up pretty high, but I am stroking the product up, creating a jagged line and very slightly rooted. I feel like the root tap is still really on trend, so I just personally like to create that myself with the lightener. And then for my third foil, right on that money piece, I take the last section and then weave right on top. So this is the only part where I have an area that has a subsection of hair in between the foil, making a total of 3 foils on each side. I'm going to finish off with the same technique for the top money piece, combing the hair back, weaving the hair towards me, doing 2 back-to-back highlights with no hair in between. And then for my third foil, you'll see that I have some hair as my subsection, and I'm going to weave right on top of that. This particular highlighting technique is great for someone who wants a money piece but wants something super subtle. So doing 3 foils along the hairline is the perfect pop of brightness that a lot of clients love. One thing to note is if your client does have some really fragile hairs along the hairline, you may want to consider switching up your volume of developer or even using Beyond Bond lightener in this area. That's actually kind of my go-to lightener for hairline highlights because it has a dual bond technology. But for this client, her hair is super healthy, so I felt really confident in continuing on with my blue powder lightener formula for the look that we're trying to achieve. If you want to learn more about how to apply money pieces, be sure to check out my other hair tutorial called The Perfect Money Piece. Once I get in all of her foils and color, I'm going to process her for 40 minutes. Now, I did remove the foils in the back section once I was done applying the money piece and continue to let her other foils process. And then I detangled her right at the bowl and had to do some further correcting because we couldn't quite lift out some of this banding. Now, most people would just go ahead and tone right over this, but I knew I needed to correct that band with a toner before doing another toner. So I'm using Silver Violet Rapid Toner with a little bit of Green Blue Rapid Toner. So my Green Blue Rapid Toner is kind of like my acting booster shade because I'm working with a very stubborn level 7-8-ish on that band. So that green blue is going to be my saving grace, but the SV is going to sheer it out for me. So overall, I did 1 ounce of my SV with a few ribbons of Green Blue Rapid Toner and 2 parts of my 9-volumed activator and applied it from her mids all the way down to her ends. I did not apply this on the first 2 to 3 inches of her hair where her hair lifted really beautifully. I was really focused on where that black cherry box dye was at, even though I did the Malibu CPR and even though I left the lightener on for 40 minutes, it still was a little stubborn. So this is where that extra correcting step is needed. And then I processed her for 15 minutes right at the bowl, shampooed her out, and towel dried her, and then applied her final toner. So I mixed up 6 NUA at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9-volume developer. This is actually going to live on that mohawk section as well as her money piece for the root tap. And then for the mids and ends and the rest of her hair, I decided to use 7N at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9-volume developer. I started out by applying the 6 NUA right onto that back mohawk section, which was the last highlighted section that I did, and separating out that money piece. So the money piece is kind of like the last area that I do want to mess with, but I went ahead and applied on the first 1/2 inch of her roots right onto that hairline. And then I'm going to let that process for about 5-7 minutes before I get ready to put on the rest of her glaze. Now I usually leave the money piece section as my last section of hair to apply my toner to. But because I'm using this root tap right onto that hairline as well as those mohawk section highlights that we did, I felt it was imperative to start with the 6 NUA first and then go ahead and let it process, because I want to diffuse that line as much as possible, specifically because her hair color is naturally really dark. So I wanted there to be enough depth and blend going on. So once I left that on for about 7 minutes, then I applied my 7N from mids to ends and just let her process right there at the bowl for an additional 15 minutes. Now the reason why I decided to use 7N is because I kind of liked the natural warmth that she lifted to, and because we also corrected her with that green blue rapid toner in SV, it just gave me a really nice canvas to work with, and 7N just seemed like the perfect color to give me that caramel look to not only enhance but also kind of correct the warmth that we got out of her hair. So I'm not trying to get rid of the warmth that she lifted to. I just want the warmth to be nice and even and natural.
And here's the final result of my boxed hair dye color correction from black cherry to some caramel highlights using all Kenra color. So just to give you a little recap, I went in with a CPR Malibu treatment first to create a really even canvas before I went in with some teasy lights using Kenra Professional Blue Powder Lightener at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 30 volume developer. And then in between those highlights, I applied 4B and Demi at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer. And then after she was done processing, we pre-toned her with SV Rapid Toner with a little bit of green blue Rapid Toner, 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer. And then for her final color melt toner, we went in with 6 NUA and blended that right into 7N, both at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer, and processed her for 20 minutes right at the bowl. So I really hoped you enjoyed this hair tutorial, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe and be sure to watch my other hair tutorials right here on this channel, and I will see you next time.